The courthouse steps in Millbrook were slippery with October rain as Marcus Sterling walked away with nothing but the clothes on his back. His ex-wife had taken the mansion, the cars, even his dog. The town that once whispered about his mysterious past now openly mocked the broken man who swept floors at the local diner. Marcus pulled his collar higher against the wind and descended into the grey morning. Behind him, through the courthouse windows, he could see Victoria's silhouette as she signed the final papers with her lawyer, a shark in an expensive suit who'd picked Marcus's life clean with surgical precision. 15 months of legal warfare had ended exactly as everyone predicted. The war hero who'd returned home with medals and secrets had been thoroughly defeated by small-town gossip and a wife who'd grown tired of his silence. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd survived assassination attempts in Prague, dismantled bomb plots in Cairo, and extracted diplomats from war zones across 3 continents. But a custody battle in rural Connecticut had brought him to his knees. His boots splashed through puddles as he walked Main Street toward Mel's diner. The familiar weight was missing from his shoulder, no tactical gear, no concealed weapons, no encrypted phone buzzing with urgent missions, just a man in a worn jacket, heading to mop floors and scrape grease from stovetops. The transformation was complete. Marcus Sterling, the Crown's most decorated operative, had become exactly what this town expected: nothing. The bell above the diner door chimed as he entered. Mel looked up from behind the counter, his weathered face creased with something that might have been sympathy. "Heard about the verdict," Mel said, pouring coffee without being asked. "Sorry, son." Marcus accepted the cup and inhaled the bitter steam. Around him, the morning regulars pretended not to stare. Old Frank from the hardware store, Sarah Chen, who ran the flower shop, Deputy Mills, still in uniform from the night shift. They'd all formed opinions about him long ago, the mysterious stranger who'd married their golden girl and then couldn't even keep her happy. "She taking Emma?" Mel asked quietly. The question hit like a blade between ribs. Emma, his 7-year-old daughter with Victoria's blonde hair and his grey eyes. The one pure thing that had emerged from their wreckage. "Supervised visitation," Marcus said. "Every other weekend if I'm lucky." Mel's jaw tightened. "That's garbage. You're a good father." But Marcus wasn't listening anymore. Through the rain-streaked window, he watched Victoria's Mercedes glide past, heading toward the house that had been his home for 8 years. She didn't look his way. Why would she? She'd won everything. The locals had never trusted him anyway. A man who appeared from nowhere with government credentials and enough money to buy the old Whitmore estate didn't fit their small-town narrative. When he'd married Victoria, the mayor's daughter, Millbrook's sweetheart, the whispers had started immediately. What did a woman like her see in him? What was he hiding? Where did all that money really come from? Marcus had given them partial truths: military service, consulting work, government contracts, enough to satisfy surface curiosity, but never the whole story. The real story would have terrified them. The things he'd done in service to the Crown, the bodies he'd buried, the secrets he carried, those stayed locked away with his old life. He'd retired at 35, exhausted by violence and haunted by faces that visited him in dreams. Millbrook had seemed like salvation, a place where Marcus Sterling the operative could die and Marcus Sterling the family man could be born. He'd dismantled his network, buried his weapons, and tried to become ordinary. The irony was brutal. In trying to protect Victoria and Emma from his past, he'd made himself vulnerable to their present. No contacts to call in favors, no leverage to use against Victoria's lawyer, no way to fight back without revealing exactly what he'd spent 8 years hiding. "Your shift starts in an hour," Mel said gently. "Want to sit for a while?" Marcus nodded, staring into his coffee as the diner filled with its usual rhythm. Conversations about the weather, local politics, the upcoming harvest festival. Normal people living normal lives, completely unaware that a man capable of toppling governments was cleaning their tables and mopping their floors. Outside, the rain continued falling on a town that had already forgotten him. Victoria would remarry eventually, probably that banker from Hartford who'd been circling her like a vulture for months. Emma would grow up calling another man father, and Marcus would fade into the background of their lives, a cautionary tale about strangers who couldn't quite fit in. He finished his coffee and reached for the apron hanging behind the counter. The old Marcus Sterling was gone, dismantled as thoroughly as any terrorist cell he'd ever eliminated. What remained was something simpler, smaller, and infinitely more broken. Or so everyone believed. The courthouse steps felt like a gauntlet as Marcus pushed through the cluster of reporters shoving microphones in his face. Camera flashes erupted around him like small explosions, each one another nail in the coffin of his former life. "Mr. Sterling, how does it feel to lose everything?" A blonde reporter thrust her microphone forward. "Any comment on your wife's allegations?" Marcus kept his head down, muscle memory from his Royal Guard days kicking in. Move with purpose. Never show weakness. Don't engage with threats. The irony wasn't lost on him that he now considered the press a threat. These same reporters who'd once fawned over him at charity galas and society functions. His solicitor, David Westbrook, fell into step beside him, briefcase clutched tight. "Marcus, we can appeal the asset division. There might be grounds to—" "No." Marcus's voice came out rougher than intended. "It's done." The black sedan waited at the curb like a funeral car. As they drove away from the courthouse, Marcus watched his old life recede in the side mirror. 3 years of legal warfare had ended with surgical precision. Elena got the house, the investments, the art collection, even the bloody dog. He got his clothes, his watch, and a bank account that wouldn't cover a month's rent in the city. "Where to?" the driver asked. Marcus realized he didn't have an answer. For the first time in 43 years, he had nowhere to go. 30 minutes later, he stood in the cramped apartment he'd hastily rented in East London, staring at cardboard boxes that contained the remnants of his existence. The place smelled of damp and disappointment, a far cry from the Georgian mansion in Kensington he'd called home for 15 years. His phone buzzed. A text from his daughter Sarah. "Dad, I'm sorry about today. Call me when you're ready." He wasn't ready. Might never be ready to explain to his 20-year-old daughter how her hero father had become tabloid fodder. The scandal had been expertly orchestrated. Elena's lawyers painting him as a reckless, unstable ex-soldier who couldn't adapt to civilian life. They'd twisted his military service, his dedication to duty, into something sinister. Marcus poured 3 fingers of whiskey, the good bottle he'd salvaged from his office, and settled into the apartment's lone chair. Through the thin walls he could hear his neighbors' television, their arguments, their lives continuing while his had effectively ended. The news was on. He almost changed the channel when he heard his name. Marcus Sterling, former Royal Protection Officer, lost his bitter divorce battle today. Sterling, who once protected members of the royal family, has fallen dramatically from grace following allegations of financial misconduct and unstable behavior. His ex-wife, socialite Elena Sterling, was awarded the majority of their shared assets. The reporter's voice faded as Marcus focused on the footage. Him leaving the courthouse, shoulders squared despite everything. Even broken, he looked dangerous. Some habits died hard. His phone rang. Unknown number. Sterling. "Marcus?" The voice was hesitant, familiar. "It's Tom Harrison." Marcus sat up straighter. Harrison had been his commanding officer in the Special Air Service before Marcus transitioned to Royal Protection. They hadn't spoken in 5 years. "Tom, how did you—" "Saw the news." Harrison's voice carried the weight of shared history. "Bloody mess, that. If you're calling to offer sympathy, I'm calling to offer work." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. What kind of work? Private security, corporate protection, the kind where your background is an asset, not a liability. Harrison paused. "But not in London. Too much noise here for you right now." "Where?" "Millbrook. Small town, couple hours north. Tech executive needs a security assessment for a new facility. Quiet job, good pay, chance to disappear for a while." Millbrook. Marcus vaguely remembered passing through it years ago, one of those unremarkable English towns that tourism forgot. The kind of place where a man could lick his wounds in peace. "When?" "Tomorrow, if you're interested. Clients eager to get started. Marcus looked around the apartment, at the boxes he hadn't bothered to unpack, at the window overlooking an alley that never saw sunlight. London held nothing for him now except reminders of what he'd lost. Send me the details. After hanging up, Marcus found himself standing straighter. Purpose, even temporary purpose, had that effect. He'd spent 3 years in legal purgatory, his skills atrophying while lawyers dissected his life. Maybe it was time to remember who he'd been before the marriage, before the money, before everything went to hell. He opened the largest box and pulled out his tactical bag, black canvas worn soft with use. His fingers found the familiar weight of it, the careful organization of compartments. Some things you never forgot. Tomorrow, he'd drive north to a town where no one knew his name or his failures. Tonight, he'd remember that Marcus Sterling had been dangerous long before he'd been wealthy, and dangerous had a way of surviving when everything else burned away. The downtown coffee shop buzzed with its usual morning crowd when Marcus first noticed the man in the navy windbreaker. Something about his posture, too rigid, too alert, triggered an instinct Marcus had spent 3 years trying to suppress. The stranger's eyes swept the room in calculated arcs, never lingering too long on any one person, but cataloguing every face, every exit, every potential threat. Marcus forced himself to look away, focusing on his laptop screen where another rejection email waited in his inbox. Thank you for your interest, but we've decided to move forward with other candidates. The same polite dismissal he'd received 17 times in 2 months. Apparently, being a disgraced former Royal Guard didn't translate well to civilian employment. The bell above the door chimed as 2 more men entered. One wore a grey hoodie despite the warm weather, while the other sported a baseball cap pulled low over his features. They moved with the same purposeful efficiency as Windbreaker, taking positions that gave them clear sightlines of the entire cafe, while appearing casual to the untrained eye. Marcus's fingers stilled on the keyboard. 3 men, strategic positioning, professional bearing masked as civilian casualness. Every alarm bell from his military training began screaming. He closed the laptop with deliberate calm and stood, his movement drawing a subtle glance from Windbreaker. Marcus walked toward the counter as if seeking a refill, but his peripheral vision tracked all 3 men. Grey Hoodie's hand rested inside his jacket pocket, the outline suggesting something more substantial than car keys. Baseball cap checked his watch, not the casual gesture of someone running late, but the precise timing of an operation. "Another coffee?" asked Sarah, the barista who'd grown familiar with Marcus's daily routine. "Actually, I need to use your phone," Marcus said quietly. "Mine's dead." She pointed toward the back hallway. Marcus walked calmly in that direction, but instead of stopping at the phone, he pushed through the rear exit into the alley. The cool morning air hit his face as he pulled out his very much alive phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? This is Marcus Sterling. There are 3 armed individuals conducting surveillance in the Grind coffee shop on 5th Street. I believe they're preparing for an attack. Sir, what makes you think? I'm former military. These men are professionals. Send units immediately, but tell them to approach carefully. Any obvious police presence might trigger them to act prematurely. Marcus ended the call and studied the building's layout. 2-story brick structure. The cafe occupied the ground floor with apartments above. 43 people inside by his count. Morning regulars, college students, a mother with her toddler, all potential casualties if this went wrong. He could walk away, should walk away, let the police handle it when they arrived in 10 or 15 minutes. But 15 minutes was an eternity in his world, and something about the synchronized timing told him this wasn't a reconnaissance mission. The sound of raised voices drifted from inside the building. Marcus moved to the side window and peered through the gap in the blinds. Windbreaker stood near the front door, his jacket now open to reveal a tactical vest. Grey Hoodie had produced what looked like a modified smartphone, probably a signal jamming device. Baseball Cap was directing customers away from the windows with sharp hand gestures that brooked no argument. The familiar weight of responsibility settled onto Marcus's shoulders like an old coat. These people weren't soldiers or targets. They were innocents who'd simply wanted their morning coffee. Sarah was probably terrified behind that counter. The young mother clutched her child, confusion and fear warring in her expression. Marcus checked his watch. Police response time in this district averaged 12 minutes, too long. He circled to the front of the building, staying low and using parked cars for cover. Through the large windows, he could see Windbreaker speaking into a radio while Grey Hoodie worked on what appeared to be a laptop. Baseball Cap stood guard near the cluster of frightened customers. Whatever they were planning, it was moving to the next phase. Marcus reached into his jacket and felt the familiar weight of the tactical knife he'd carried since his discharge. 3 years of trying to be a normal civilian, of pretending he was just another divorced guy looking for work, of suppressing every instinct that had kept him alive through 2 tours in Afghanistan and 5 years protecting royalty. But normal men didn't recognize terrorist cells in coffee shops. Normal men didn't instinctively catalog exit strategies and threat assessments. Normal men would wait for the police and hope for the best. Marcus Sterling had never been a normal man. He closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the last pretense of his civilian life fall away like a discarded mask. When he opened them again, the predator that Helena had glimpsed in their final argument was fully awake. The 3 men inside had made a critical error in their operational planning. They'd trapped themselves in a confined space with someone who had nothing left to lose. The abandoned warehouse smelled of rust and decay, but Marcus had endured worse. He pressed his back against the corrugated metal wall, listening to the footsteps circling the perimeter. 3 sets, maybe 4. The terrorists had been surprisingly quick to track him here, which meant either he was losing his touch or they were better than he'd initially assessed. Neither possibility comforted him. Through a gap in the wall, he watched the lead figure gesture to his companions. The man moved with military precision, definitely trained, probably ex-special forces gone rogue. Marcus had seen the type before during his years with the Royal Guard. Idealists turned extremists, their skills honed by legitimate militaries before being twisted toward darker purposes. The irony wasn't lost on him that he might be described the same way now. Marcus checked his stolen pistol. 4 rounds left. He'd need to make them count, but more importantly, he needed at least one of these men alive. The attack on the shopping district was just the beginning. He was certain of that much. The coordinated nature of the strikes, the sophisticated equipment, the professional execution despite the ultimate failure, all of it pointed to something larger brewing beneath the surface of his quiet suburban town. A shadow moved past the window to his right. Marcus remained perfectly still, controlling his breathing the way he'd been taught 15 years ago in a different life. The shadow paused, and Marcus could hear the soft whisper of fabric against metal as the figure leaned closer to peer inside. In one fluid motion, Marcus pivoted around the window frame and grabbed the man's rifle barrel, yanking him forward while driving his elbow into the terrorist's throat. The man dropped without a sound, unconscious before he hit the concrete floor. "Hassan?" a voice called from outside. "Hassan? Report!" Marcus quickly dragged the unconscious man deeper into the warehouse, stripping him of his tactical vest and radio headset. The gear was military grade, far beyond what typical domestic terrorists could acquire. Someone with serious resources was backing this operation. "Hassan's not coming to the phone right now," Marcus whispered into the radio, disguising his voice with a harsh rasp. The response was immediate and telling. The remaining terrorists switched to Arabic, their voices sharp with alarm. Marcus caught fragments, enough to understand they were calling for backup and preparing to storm the building. His Arabic was rusty but functional, another skill from his past life that Jessica had never known about. There were so many things Jessica had never known about him. Maybe if he'd been more honest about who he really was beneath the suburban father facade, their marriage wouldn't have crumbled. But then again, maybe that honesty would have destroyed them even sooner. The warehouse's rear exit beckoned, but Marcus stayed put. Running would only buy him temporary safety while leaving him with more questions than answers. He needed intel, and the unconscious terrorist at his feet represented his best source. Marcus zip-tied the man's hands with a plastic restraint from the tactical vest, then positioned himself behind a stack of wooden pallets near the main entrance. The remaining terrorists would come through that door. Their training and urgency would make them predictable. He didn't have to wait long. The door burst open and two figures rushed through, weapons raised, moving in a practiced sweep pattern. Marcus let them advance several steps before making his move. His first shot took down the trailing figure with a leg wound, painful but not fatal. The second shot forced the leader to dive for cover behind a concrete support pillar. "You're surrounded," the leader called out in accented English. "Surrender and we'll make it quick." Marcus almost laughed. The man clearly didn't understand the situation he'd walked into. In the Royal Guard, Marcus had faced down armed insurgents in palace courtyards while protecting dignitaries who wouldn't live to see another sunrise without his intervention. 3 amateur terrorists in an abandoned warehouse, barely registered as a warm-up exercise. "Counter-offer," Marcus replied, his voice echoing off the metal walls. "Tell me who's funding your operation and I'll let you walk away with all your limbs attached." The terrorists' response was a burst of automatic gunfire that sparked off the metal walls around Marcus's position, predictable and wasteful. Exactly what Marcus had expected from someone more passionate than professional. Marcus moved low and fast, using the warehouse's maze of debris and equipment to circle around behind the shooter's position. The wounded terrorist was crawling toward the exit, leaving a blood trail but still very much alive. Good. Wounded prisoners were often more talkative than dead ones. The remaining gunman had fallen silent, probably listening for Marcus's movement. But Marcus had learned patience in a much harsher school than whatever training camp these terrorists had attended. He could wait all day if necessary, though the distant sound of sirens suggested that luxury wouldn't last much longer. Time to end this conversation and start asking better questions. The convenience store's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Marcus's face as he studied the security monitor behind the counter. 3 screens showed different angles of the street outside, and what he saw made his blood run cold. 2 men in dark jackets stood at the corner, their postures too rigid, their eyes scanning the area with military precision. One spoke into a radio while the other kept his hand near his waistband. Marcus recognized the stance. He'd used it countless times during his Royal Guard days. "You see them too," said Ahmed, the store owner, his voice barely above a whisper. The elderly Pakistani man had been watching Marcus watch the screens. "They've been there for 20 minutes, same as yesterday and the day before." Marcus nodded, his mind already calculating angles and distances. The men weren't locals. Their equipment was too clean, their coordination too practiced. This wasn't random crime or gang activity. This was surveillance, and surveillance meant something bigger was coming. "Ahmed, you need to close up early today," Marcus said, never taking his eyes off the monitors. "Take your family somewhere safe." "This is my livelihood," Ahmed protested. "I cannot simply—" "Look at me." Marcus turned, and Ahmed stepped back at the intensity in his eyes. "I've seen this before. Whatever they're planning, it's not going to end with just watching." The bell above the door chimed, and Marcus tensed, but it was only Mrs. Chen from the apartment complex down the street. She moved slowly toward the milk cooler, oblivious to the danger lurking outside. Marcus watched her on the monitor, a sitting duck in a shooting gallery. His phone buzzed. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment he hesitated. Their last conversation had ended badly, with her accusing him of paranoia and him struggling to explain without revealing classified details from his past. "Marcus, thank God." Sarah's voice was strained when he answered. "Something's happening at the community center. Men with guns, they're not police, but they're asking about you." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Marcus gripped the counter, his knuckles white. "How many?" "I saw at least 4. They showed pictures to Janet at the front desk." "Marcus, what's going on? Who are these people?" Through the security monitor, he watched the two men outside receive some kind of signal. They began moving toward the store with purposeful strides. "Sarah, listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Get everyone out of there. Use the back exit, the one that leads to the parking structure. Don't argue, just do it." "Marcus, now!" He ended the call and turned to Ahmed. "Back room. Now, take Mrs. Chen with you and don't come out until I tell you." Ahmed started to protest again, but Marcus was already moving. He vaulted over the counter with fluid grace, muscle memory taking over as his body remembered skills he'd tried to forget. His hands found the baseball bat Ahmed kept behind the register. Not ideal, but it would have to do. The bell chimed again as the two men entered. They moved like professionals, one covering the door while the other advanced toward the counter. Both had their hands near concealed weapons. "Store's closed," Marcus called out from behind a rack of snacks, his voice carrying the authority he'd once used to command respect in royal halls. "We're looking for someone," the lead man replied, his accent Eastern European. "Marcus Sterling. We have questions." "Never heard of him." The man smiled without humor. "Perhaps this will help your memory." Marcus saw the gun appear before the man fully cleared it from his jacket. 20 years of elite training compressed into a single moment as he launched himself forward, using the snack rack as a shield. Packages of chips and candy exploded around him as the first shot rang out. He rolled behind the checkout counter as the second man opened fire, the register exploding in a shower of sparks and plastic. Mrs. Chen screamed from the back room, and Marcus felt the familiar cold fury settle over him, the same emotion that had made him legendary among the Royal Guard. These men had brought violence to innocent people. They'd threatened Sarah and invaded his community. They'd made a critical error in judgment. They'd assumed Marcus Sterling was just another broken-down civilian. Using the counter for cover, he army-crawled toward the end-cap display of motor oil. The bottles were heavy, and glass made excellent projectiles. He grabbed two, counting the seconds between shots, mapping the shooters' positions by sound. When the firing paused for reloading, Marcus rose like a storm, hurling bottles with deadly accuracy. The first caught the lead gunman in the temple, dropping him instantly. The second shattered against the doorframe as the other man dove for cover. But Marcus was already moving, the baseball bat singing through the air toward his remaining opponent's skull. The fight was over in seconds. The abandoned textile factory on the outskirts of town had been rotting for 15 years, its broken windows like dead eyes staring across the industrial wasteland. Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, studying the building through binoculars he'd borrowed from Detective Sarah Chen. 3 guards patrolled the perimeter, amateurs, but armed amateurs nonetheless. "You sure about this?" Chen whispered, adjusting her tactical vest. Behind them, a SWAT team waited for Marcus's assessment, their captain reluctantly following the mayor's orders to let the former Royal Guard take point. Marcus lowered the binoculars, his jaw tight. "They're using standard rotation patterns. Whoever trained them knew enough to be dangerous, but not enough to be smart." He handed the binoculars back. "The real question is what they're guarding in there." The answer had started taking shape 3 hours earlier, when Marcus recognized the tactical formation the terrorists had used during the bank robbery. It was a modified version of something he'd seen in classified briefings, a signature technique of Khalil Assad, a bomb maker who'd supposedly died in a drone strike 2 years ago. But dead men didn't plan coordinated attacks on American soil. "Movement, south entrance," one of the SWAT officers reported through his radio. Marcus peered around the container. A black sedan was approaching the factory, its headlights cutting through the late afternoon shadows. The vehicle stopped near a loading dock, and 2 figures emerged, one he didn't recognize, but the other made his blood run cold. Viktor Kozlov, Russian FSB, officially retired but unofficially still very much in the game. Marcus had crossed paths with him twice during his Royal Guard days, once in Prague and once in a Syrian safe house that had turned very unsafe very quickly. Kozlov moved with the same predatory grace Marcus remembered, scanning his surroundings with the paranoia of a man who'd survived 3 decades in intelligence work. "We need to move now," Marcus said, already checking his borrowed service weapon, "before they relocate whatever operation they're running." "Wait," Chen grabbed his arm. "You know that man." It wasn't a question. Marcus had gone rigid the moment he'd spotted Kozlov, his breathing shallow and controlled in a way that suggested old training kicking in. "Viktor Kozlov, Russian intelligence." Marcus's voice carried the weight of bad history. "If he's here, this isn't just terrorism, it's state-sponsored, which means the target isn't just our town, it's something bigger." The SWAT captain, a grizzled veteran named Rodriguez, moved closer. "What kind of bigger?" Marcus was already moving, keeping low as he advanced toward the factory's eastern wall. The kind that makes the evening news in Moscow look like a victory parade. The first guard never saw him coming. Marcus emerged from the shadows like a ghost, one hand clamping over the man's mouth, while the other found the pressure point that dropped him unconscious in seconds. Royal Guard training had emphasized silence over flash, efficiency over brutality. Some habits never died. Chen and the SWAT team followed his lead, moving with practiced coordination as they cleared the outer perimeter. Marcus felt the familiar rush of operational focus, the way everything except the mission faded to background noise. For the first time since the divorce papers were signed, he felt like himself again. They reached the main entrance just as voices erupted from inside the building, angry, urgent Russian mixed with accented English. Through a grimy window, Marcus caught glimpses of movement, at least 6 figures around what looked like electronic equipment, cables snaking across the concrete floor towards several large cases. "Bombs?" Rodriguez mouthed. Marcus shook his head, studying the setup more carefully. The cases were wrong, too clean, too precisely arranged, and the electronic equipment looked more like transmission gear than detonation controls. Then he saw the laptop screen, and everything clicked into place with terrifying clarity. "It's not a bomb," he whispered urgently. "They're hacking something. Those cases, they're signal amplifiers." Chen's eyes widened as she followed his reasoning. "The power grid? Or worse?" Marcus thought about the timing, the coordination, the presence of someone like Kozlov, the nuclear plant, 30 miles southeast of here. The voices inside grew more agitated, and Marcus saw Kozlov gesturing emphatically at a bank of monitors. Whatever they were doing, they were close to finishing it. "We go in hard and fast," Marcus decided. "No negotiation, no warnings. They get one chance to surrender, then we end this." Rodriguez nodded grimly. "Rules of engagement?" Marcus checked his weapon one final time, muscle memory guiding his movements. "Anyone who reaches for a weapon or a keyboard is a threat. Anyone who runs is a threat. Anyone who looks like they're about to complete whatever they're doing in there," he met Rodriguez's eyes, "is a dead threat." The factory's silence was broken by the metallic click of safeties being disengaged. Marcus Sterling, who'd lost everything he thought mattered, was about to discover what he was truly capable of when the stakes couldn't be higher. The abandoned warehouse on Pier 47 reeked of rust and rotting fish. Marcus crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, watching 3 figures move through the shadows ahead. His phone buzzed once. Detective Sarah Chen signaled that the perimeter was secure. No backup was coming through those doors. He'd insisted on going in alone. The terrorists had made it clear, any sign of police presence, and they'd detonate the devices they'd planted throughout the city. Marcus had seen enough of their handiwork to know they weren't bluffing. The weight of the Glock felt familiar in his hand, muscle memory awakening after years of dormancy. He'd hoped never to feel this again, the cold focus that came before violence, the way time seemed to slow and every sense sharpened to a razor's edge. But as he studied the warehouse layout, calculating angles and distances, Marcus realized part of him had missed it. A voice echoed from the center of the building. "Mr. Sterling, I know you're here. Please, join us." The accent was cultured, European. Marcus had heard it before during his Royal Guard briefings. Dmitry Kozlov, former Spetsnaz, now selling his services to the highest bidder. The man who'd turned domestic terrorism into an art form. Marcus stepped into the open, weapon lowered but ready. 3 armed figures flanked a 4th man seated calmly on a metal chair. Kozlov was younger than expected, maybe 40, with the lean build of someone who'd never stopped training. His smile was genuinely warm. The famous Marcus Sterling, though I suppose famous isn't quite right anymore, is it? Disgraced has a better ring. What do you want, Kozlov? Direct. I appreciate that. Kozlov gestured to his men, who raised their weapons. I want to know why a washed-up ex-soldier thinks he can interfere with my operation. Marcus kept his breathing steady, evaluating threats. The man to his left favored his right leg, old injury. The one on the right held his rifle too high, exposing his torso. The third stayed behind Kozlov, professional but overconfident. Your operation murdered innocent people. My operation sent a message. The death toll was regrettable but necessary. Kozlov stood, his movement fluid. But you, Mr. Sterling, you've been causing problems, saving people you shouldn't have saved, drawing attention to patterns you shouldn't have noticed. The warehouse lights flickered, casting dancing shadows across the concrete floor. Marcus realized this had been planned. Kozlov wanted this confrontation. The question was why. You could have killed me already, Marcus said. What's the real game? Kozlov's smile widened. Very good. You see, Mr. Sterling, my employers have been watching you. A man with your skills, your current circumstances. They believe you might be persuaded to see reason. You're recruiting me? The divorce left you with nothing. No money, no home, no purpose. But we can offer you all 3. Handsomely. Kozlov pulled out a tablet, showing bank account numbers with more zeros than Marcus had seen in years. All you have to do is walk away. Forget what you've learned. Let us finish our work. For a moment, Marcus almost laughed. After everything he'd lost, everything that had been stripped away, they thought money would turn him. They didn't understand what they were dealing with. And, if I refuse, then you'll share the fate of everyone else who's interfered. Kozlov's voice hardened. The devices are already in place. This city will burn regardless. The only question is whether you'll profit from its ashes or become part of them. Marcus felt the old calm descending, the state of mind he'd cultivated through years of protecting royalty, of standing between threats and innocent lives. His ex-wife had called it his robot mode, the way he became something inhuman when violence was necessary. I have a counter-offer, Marcus said quietly. Oh? You tell me where the devices are, and I'll let you live long enough to see a courtroom. Kozlov laughed, a genuine sound of delight. Mr. Sterling, you're outnumbered 3 to 1, outgunned, and completely alone. What exactly do you think? Marcus moved. The first shot took out the lights, plunging them into near darkness. He rolled left as automatic fire erupted where he'd been standing, came up behind the shipping container and put 2 rounds center mass into the injured gunman. The man dropped without a sound. Muzzle flashes lit the warehouse like strobes. Marcus used the chaos flowing between cover points with lethal precision. The second gunman tried to flank him and walked into a trap. Marcus had anticipated the move, was waiting. 3 shots, tight grouping, and another threat eliminated. The third man was better, more cautious. But caution was a luxury Marcus couldn't afford. He grabbed a piece of rebar from the floor and hurled it across the warehouse. When the gunman turned toward the sound, Marcus was already moving, closing distance with surgical efficiency. When the echoes faded, only 2 men remained standing in the warehouse. Kozlov stood perfectly still, hands visible, his earlier confidence replaced by professional respect. Now, Marcus said, pressing the Glock against the terrorist's temple, let's discuss those devices. The abandoned warehouse stank of rust and diesel fuel, but Marcus had smelled worse in Kandahar. He crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, watching 3 men patrol the perimeter through gaps in the corrugated metal walls. Each carried assault rifles with practiced ease, not weekend warriors playing soldier, but professionals who knew their business. His phone buzzed. A text from Detective Sarah Chen, SWAT, delayed 30 minutes. Construction accident blocking route. Do not engage. Marcus deleted the message and powered down the phone. 30 minutes was 30 minutes too long. The intel from Hassan's phone had been clear. The warehouse contained enough ammonium nitrate to level half the downtown district. More importantly, it contained answers about who was funding this operation. He'd already counted 8 hostiles during his reconnaissance. The smart play was to wait for backup, establish a perimeter, negotiate. That was protocol. That was safe. But Marcus had stopped caring about safe the moment Elena walked out with divorce papers in one hand and his daughter's custody agreement in the other. The first sentry never saw him coming. Marcus emerged from the shadows like smoke, one hand clamping over the man's mouth while the other found the carotid artery. The terrorist dropped unconscious in 6 seconds, his rifle sliding silently into Marcus's waiting hands. The AK-74 felt foreign after years of Western weapons, but muscle memory transcended politics. Marcus checked the magazine, full load, 30 rounds. He stripped the unconscious man of his radio and ammunition, then zip-tied his hands with plastic cuffs from his tactical vest. Moving along the warehouse's eastern wall, Marcus could hear voices inside speaking what sounded like Chechen. His linguistic skills were limited to Arabic and Dari, but tone was universal. They were arguing about timing, someone wanting to move faster than the others preferred. The second sentry was smoking near a side entrance, rifle slung carelessly across his shoulder. Marcus approached from his blind spot, using a forklift as cover. This one required more finesse, too close to the main building for a quiet takedown. Marcus picked up a piece of scrap metal and hurled it toward the far end of the warehouse. When the sentry turned to investigate the noise, Marcus closed the distance. The man had just enough time to widen his eyes before the rifle butt connected with his temple. 2 down, 6 to go. The side door was unlocked. Overconfidence or poor operational security. Marcus slipped inside, immediately cataloguing the warehouse's interior. Dozens of white fertilizer bags stacked in neat pyramids. Detonation equipment arranged on makeshift tables. And in the center of it all, a man in expensive clothes gesturing angrily at a laptop screen. Marcus didn't recognize the face, but he recognized the type. Clean hands, soft belly, someone who ordered death from climate-controlled offices. The real target. 3 more terrorists flanked the man, while another worked frantically at the laptop. The 6th man was nowhere visible, which meant he was either outside or positioned as Overwatch. Marcus had to assume the worst. He needed that laptop intact, which meant precision shooting in a warehouse full of explosives. The irony wasn't lost on him. One stray round into the ammonium nitrate and the whole discussion became moot. Marcus settled into a prone position behind a concrete support pillar, rifle scope finding the nearest terrorist's center mass. His breathing slowed, heart rate dropping into the zone he'd inhabited during countless operations in Afghanistan. Time dilated, sounds sharpened, peripheral vision expanded. Shot echoed through the warehouse like thunder. The terrorist spun and dropped, blood blooming across his chest. Before the others could react, Marcus had already adjusted his aim. The second man fell, clutching his throat. Now chaos erupted. The laptop operator dove for cover while Mr. Expensive Suit screamed orders in accented English. The remaining terrorists sprayed automatic fire in Marcus's general direction, bullets sparking off concrete and steel. Marcus rolled left, came up firing. His third shot punched through the shooter's sternum, sending him backward into a stack of fertilizer bags. The laptop operator popped up with a pistol, firing wild shots that came nowhere close to their target. "Don't move," Marcus commanded, rifle trained on the man's forehead. "Hands where I can see them." The operator's weapon clattered to the floor. Expensive Suit tried to run for a rear exit, but Marcus put a round into the concrete at his feet. "I said don't move." Marcus's voice carried the authority of someone who'd given life and death orders in foreign wars. "Both of you, on your knees, fingers interlaced behind your heads." They complied, faces pale with shock and fear. Marcus approached carefully, checking corners for the missing 6th man. The warehouse felt empty now except for his prisoners and the dead, but appearances could deceive. Sirens wailed in the distance, Chen's SWAT team finally breaking through whatever traffic snarl had delayed them. Marcus kept his rifle trained on the two survivors while moving toward the laptop. The screen showed a timer counting down, 17 minutes and 38 seconds. His blood ran cold. This wasn't the main event, it was just the opening act. The abandoned warehouse reeked of rust and decay, but Marcus had smelled worse in places that would never appear on any map. He pressed his back against a concrete pillar, listening to the footsteps echoing through the cavernous space above. 3 men, maybe 4, moving with the practiced silence of professionals. The terrorist cell had chosen their base well, isolated, multiple exit points, and enough structural complexity to make a frontal assault costly. His phone buzzed against his ribs. Sarah's text was brief: 12 confirmed inside, heavy weapons, FBI 20 minutes out. 20 minutes. Marcus almost smiled at the irony. In his Royal Guard days, 20 minutes was an eternity. Now, with innocent lives hanging in the balance and his own past sins demanding payment, it felt like borrowed time. He'd entered through a drainage culvert that connected to the old industrial complex. The blueprints Sarah had pulled showed service tunnels running beneath the main floor, a ghost highway from the building's manufacturing days. Marcus had memorized every line, every potential choke point. Old habits died hard, especially the ones written in blood. The first sentry never saw him coming. Marcus emerged from a maintenance hatch like a shadow-given substance, his movements flowing with the muscle memory of 100 similar operations. The man dropped without a sound, his radio and sidearm disappearing into Marcus's possession before the body settled. "Checkpoint Alpha, report." The voice crackled through the stolen radio. Marcus counted to 5, then keyed the mic. "All clear, Alpha. Thought I heard something, but negative contact. Copy that." He moved deeper into the maze of machinery and storage containers. Intel suggested the terrorists were planning something for the town's harvest festival. 3,000 people gathered in the central square, including most of the families Marcus had grown up knowing. The same people who now crossed the street when they saw him, their eyes filled with the particular disgust reserved for fallen heroes. The irony wasn't lost on him. 6 months ago, he'd been planning to leave Millbrook forever, to disappear into anonymity and let the town forget Marcus Sterling had ever existed. Now he was risking everything to save the very people who'd already written his obituary. A metallic clank echoed from somewhere ahead. Marcus froze, letting his ears paint the picture his eyes couldn't see. Multiple voices, urgent but controlled. The cadence of men preparing for war. He climbed a service ladder to an observation platform, keeping low as he approached a grime-covered window. Below, the main floor of the warehouse had been transformed into a tactical staging area. Weapons cases, communication equipment, and maps covered every available surface, but it was the devices in the center that made Marcus's blood run cold. Improvised explosive devices, carefully arranged around what looked like a scale model of Millbrook's town square. The festival layout was represented in miniature. Stage positions, vendor booths, even the children's play area. This wasn't just an attack, it was a massacre in the making. Final countdown, gentlemen. The voice belonged to a lean man with prematurely grey hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. 12 hours until the festival begins. Our message will echo far beyond this insignificant town. Marcus counted heads while photographing the scene with his phone. 14 men, not 12. Sarah's intel was good but incomplete. He spotted assault rifles, body armor, and enough explosives to level a city block. Whatever political statement these men intended to make, they planned to write it in innocent blood. His phone vibrated with an incoming call. Sarah again, probably wondering about his status, but answering would mean noise, and noise would mean discovery. The mission came first, another lesson learned in places that officially didn't exist. Moving with practiced stealth, Marcus descended toward the main floor. The Royal Guard had trained him for scenarios like this, though they'd never imagined he'd be operating alone against such odds. Then again, They'd never imagined a lot of things about Marcus Sterling. He'd need to disable their communications first, then create enough chaos to prevent a coordinated response. The explosives were the priority. Even if he couldn't save himself, he had to ensure those devices never reached the festival. As he approached the terrorist commander's position, Marcus caught a fragment of conversation that stopped him cold. "Sterling's already inside, isn't he?" Our source confirmed it. The local cop fed him just enough information to bring him running. "Good. When we kill the great Marcus Sterling alongside all those festival goers, the psychological impact will be devastating. The fallen hero dies failing to save his hometown." Marcus felt the familiar cold settle into his bones, the same detachment that had carried him through his darkest missions. They knew he was coming. This was a trap within a trap, and he'd walked into it with eyes wide open. But understanding the game didn't mean losing it. The abandoned warehouse echoed with the sound of Marcus's boots against concrete as he made his final sweep of the perimeter. 3 hours had passed since the last terrorist had fallen, and the tactical teams were still processing the scene. Bodies lay covered in white sheets, evidence markers dotted the floor like macabre confetti, and the acrid smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Detective Sarah Chen approached him cautiously, her notepad clutched in trembling hands. She'd seen combat before, but nothing like this, nothing like what Marcus Sterling had unleashed in those 20 minutes of controlled fury. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded, pulling off his tactical vest. His shirt underneath was soaked with sweat and blood, not all of it his own. "I know." They walked to a quiet corner where the forensics team hadn't yet reached. Chen studied his face, searching for some explanation that would make sense of what she'd witnessed. The man before her bore little resemblance to the broken divorce case she'd met just days ago. 16 confirmed kills, she began, consulting her notes. All clean shots, professional-grade tactical movement, 0 civilian casualties despite the hostages being used as human shields. She looked up at him. "The FBI wants to know who you really are." Marcus leaned against the wall, suddenly feeling every one of his 42 years. Marcus Sterling, Royal Guard, discharged 8 years ago. That's all they need to know. Bullshit. Chen's composure finally cracked. Royal Guards protect the Queen at garden parties. They don't move like ghosts through terrorist kill zones. They don't neutralize trained operatives with handguns from impossible angles. She stepped closer. "I've been a cop for 15 years, Sterling. I know the difference between military training and something else entirely." Before Marcus could respond, Federal Agent Williams jogged over, his expression grim. "We've got a problem." The explosive device they had rigged wasn't just for the building. It was connected to something bigger. Marcus straightened. How much bigger? 3 other locations across the city. Shopping mall, hospital, elementary school. Williams pulled out a tablet showing a schematic. The warehouse was the control hub. When they realized they were losing, someone triggered a backup protocol. "We've got maybe 40 minutes before simultaneous detonation." The color drained from Chen's face. "How many people?" "Conservative estimate? 3,000. Marcus was already moving, grabbing his gear. The exhaustion that had weighed him down moments before vanished, replaced by cold determination. "Bomb squad response time? 60 minutes minimum. They're dealing with a chemical spill across town. Then we handle it ourselves." Marcus checked his remaining ammunition. 3 magazines left. It would have to be enough. "We?" Chen stared at him. "I'm a detective, not some super soldier." Marcus turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her take a step back. Not anger or desperation, but a terrible clarity. The look of a man who had found his purpose again. "You want to know who I really am?" he said quietly. "Royal Guard was my cover. For 6 years I worked for a unit that doesn't officially exist. We handled the problems that regular military couldn't touch. Terrorist cells, foreign operatives, threats to national security that required—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Permanent solutions." Williams whistled low. "Black Ops." Darker than that. Marcus shouldered his rifle. I walked away because I couldn't stomach it anymore. The things we did, the lines we crossed, I thought I could leave that part of myself behind, build a normal life. But, Chen prompted. Marcus's jaw tightened. But sometimes the monster you try to bury is the only thing standing between innocent people and oblivion. He started toward the exit, but Chen grabbed his arm. You can't do this alone. Watch me. No, her grip tightened. I meant what I said. I'm not a super soldier, but I know this city better than anyone. I know shortcuts, back entrances, which routes the evacuation teams will use. She looked him dead in the eye. You need me. Marcus studied her for a long moment. He could see the fear in her expression, but also something else. The same stubborn courage that had driven her to follow him into the warehouse in the first place. The elementary school, he decided. That's where they'll expect us to go first. Which means it's probably the most heavily defended. Williams nodded. Makes sense. Maximum psychological impact. Then that's where we start. Marcus headed for the exit, Chen falling into step beside him. Williams, coordinate with evacuation teams. I want those buildings cleared as much as possible. As they reached the warehouse door, Chen touched his shoulder. Sterling? That unit you worked for, what was it called? Marcus paused in the doorway, silhouetted against the harsh police lights outside. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of buried ghosts. Officially? It was never called anything. He looked back at her with those cold, empty eyes. Unofficially, we were known as the Cleaners. Marcus pressed his back against the concrete wall of the abandoned warehouse, listening to the rhythmic footsteps of the patrol above. 3 men, heavy boots, tactical gear. He'd been tracking this cell for 48 hours, following breadcrumbs from the communications equipment they'd salvaged from the community center raid. The bitter taste of betrayal still lingered in his mouth. Detective Sarah Chen had been feeding information to the terrorists all along. Her perfectly timed arrival during previous operations, her knowledge of police response protocols, her convenient absences during critical moments, it all made sense now. The woman he'd trusted with coordination between law enforcement and his improvised counter-terrorism efforts had been playing both sides. A metal door creaked open somewhere in the darkness above. Marcus counted the descending footsteps on the rusted staircase. 2 sets now, 1 guard remained on the upper level. He checked his appropriated Glock, 7 rounds remaining. Not ideal for what appeared to be a significant operation brewing in this forgotten corner of the industrial district. The warehouse had been abandoned for years, but recent tire tracks in the mud outside and the faint hum of generators suggested it had found new purpose. The shipment arrives at dawn, a voice echoed from the main floor. American accent, Midwest inflection. Not what Marcus had expected from the predominantly Eastern European cell he'd been tracking. Chen confirmed the police will be responding to a false alarm across town, another voice replied. This one carried the familiar accent he'd heard in intercepted communications. We have a 4-hour window. Marcus crept along the wall toward a gap between shipping containers. Moonlight filtered through broken skylights, casting skeletal shadows across stacked crates and abandoned machinery. The generators powered work lights strung between support beams, creating pools of harsh illumination surrounded by deeper darkness. He needed intelligence before engaging. The mention of a shipment suggested this wasn't just another safe house. This was operational infrastructure. Something significant enough to justify Chen's long-term infiltration of the police department. Moving between the containers, Marcus spotted the first guard. Young, nervous, gripping an AK-47 with the white-knuckled tension of someone inexperienced with violence. The second guard stood near what appeared to be communications equipment, older, calmer, his weapon held with practiced familiarity. The voices continued their discussion near the center of the warehouse, but Marcus couldn't get a clear visual without exposing himself. He needed a better position. A service ladder led to a maintenance catwalk running along the warehouse's perimeter. Marcus tested the first rung, solid despite surface rust. He climbed slowly, controlling his breathing, each movement deliberate and silent. The years hadn't dulled his instincts, even if they'd buried them under layers of suburban domesticity and legal proceedings. From the catwalk, he could see the full scope of the operation. 6 men total, not 3 as he'd initially estimated. Crates of what appeared to be explosive materials. Maps spread across a makeshift table marked with locations throughout the downtown area. And in the center, a device he recognized from his Royal Guard training, a radio detonation system capable of coordinating multiple simultaneous explosions. This wasn't harassment or intimidation. This was preparation for something catastrophic. Marcus photographed what he could with his phone, then began calculating approaches. 6 targets, 7 rounds, and at least 2 avenues of escape they'd likely monitored. The smart play was retreat. Gather intel, alert federal authorities, let proper resources handle the situation. But the maps showed targets including the hospital where survivors from previous attacks were recovering, the elementary school where his neighbor's children attended classes, the library that had become an unofficial community center after the terrorists destroyed the original. Phase 3 initiates regardless of Chen's status, the American voice continued. If she's been compromised, we accelerate the timeline. Dawn becomes go time for everything. Marcus checked his watch. 3 hours until dawn. He thought about Sarah Chen, wondering how long she'd been feeding information to these people. Had she known about the initial attacks? Had she deliberately delayed responses, ensuring maximum casualties? The woman who'd shared coffee with him while planning defensive strategies, who'd seemed genuinely committed to protecting their community, how much of that had been performance? The bitter irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent months in family court, being painted as dangerous, unreliable, a man whose military background made him unsuitable for civilized society. Meanwhile, the person everyone trusted, the decorated police detective with commendations and community awards, was actively enabling mass murder. Marcus began his descent, moving toward the first guard position. 7 rounds would have to be enough, speed and precision over firepower, use their overconfidence and his knowledge of their positions against them. As he reached the warehouse floor, Marcus Sterling disappeared entirely. In his place moved someone else, the Royal Guard operative who'd once protected dignitaries from precisely these kinds of threats, the man who understood that sometimes civilization's greatest threats came from within its own institutions. The abandoned textile factory loomed against the storm-darkened sky like a monument to decay. Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, watching the building through rain-streaked binoculars. 3 guards patrolled the perimeter. Amateurs, their movements predictable, their positioning sloppy. They clearly hadn't expected anyone to track them to this forgotten corner of the industrial district. His earpiece crackled. "Sterling, you sure about this?" Detective Sarah Chen's voice carried equal parts concern and frustration. "SWAT's 10 minutes out." 10 minutes is 9 minutes too long, Marcus whispered back, adjusting his position as one of the guards wandered closer. "They're not keeping hostages for a tea party, Chen. Every second we wait." A muffled scream echoed from inside the building, cutting through the night air like a blade. Marcus's jaw tightened. Mayor Blackwood's voice. "The bastards were already starting. I'm going in. God damn it, Marcus." He switched off the earpiece and moved. The first guard never knew what hit him. Marcus emerged from the shadows like smoke, his arms snaking around the man's throat in a sleeper hold that dropped him unconscious in seconds. The second guard turned at the sound of his partner's radio hitting the pavement, but Marcus was already there, driving his elbow into the man's solar plexus before silencing him with a precise strike to the carotid artery. The third guard proved more alert, spinning with his rifle raised. Marcus dove low, sweeping the man's legs as gunfire erupted overhead, muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness. They hit the ground together, wrestling for control of the weapon. Marcus drove his knee into the guard's ribs, feeling bone crack, then wrenched the rifle away and used the stock to end the fight. 3 down. No shots fired on his end, just like the old days. The factory's loading dock hung open like a mouthful of broken teeth. Marcus slipped inside, his commandeered rifle held ready. The interior stretched into shadow-filled vastness, broken machinery and debris, creating a maze of hiding spots. Industrial lights hung from chains, casting harsh pools of illumination across the concrete floor. Voices echoed from the far end of the building. Marcus moved between the shadows, his footsteps silent on the oil-stained floor. The Royal Guard training he'd tried so hard to bury came flooding back. Breath control, situational awareness, the careful mathematics of violence that had once been his specialty. He reached a position behind an overturned conveyor belt and peered around the edge. 5 men surrounded a metal chair where Mayor Blackwood sat bound and bloodied, his mayoral chain of office grotesquely twisted around his neck like a noose. Marcus recognized the leader immediately. Viktor Kozlov, the bomb maker whose dossier he'd memorized during his guard years, supposedly killed in a Prague operation 3 years ago. Apparently, intelligence reports weren't always accurate. "Your city's emergency response protocols," Kozlov was saying, holding a tablet in front of Blackwood's face. "Access codes, evacuation routes, communication frequencies. Give us what we need, and your death will be quick." Blackwood spat blood. "Go to hell." Kozlov nodded to one of his men, who stepped forward with a blowtorch. The mayor's scream filled the factory as the flame kissed his shoulder. Marcus had counted 5 hostiles, noted their positions, catalogued their weapons. 2 AK-47s, 1 shotgun, 2 pistols, standard terrorist cell configuration. He'd handled worse odds during the Belfast incident, though he'd had a full team then. Now it was just him, 3 stolen magazines of ammunition, and a lifetime of carefully suppressed rage finally finding an outlet. Time to work. The first shot took down the man with the blowtorch, the rifle crack echoing through the factory like thunder. Kozlov's team scattered, diving for cover behind machinery and overturned tables. Marcus was already moving, using their confusion to reposition, appearing where they didn't expect him. The second terrorist fell as he tried to flank left, Marcus's bullet catching him center mass. The third managed to get his shotgun up, but Marcus dove behind a support pillar as buckshot peppered the concrete. He came around the other side, rifle raised, and put 2 rounds in the man's chest. Kozlov and his remaining partner had taken cover behind an industrial press, using Blackwood's chair as mobile cover. "Very impressive, whoever you are," Kozlov called out. "But you cannot save them all. My men have targets throughout your city. Kill me, and the bombs still detonate." Marcus studied the angles, calculating trajectories and timing. The mayor was too exposed for a direct assault, but the factory's layout offered alternatives. Old habits from his demolition training kicked in as he examined the support structure above Kozlov's position. 1 shot. The cable snapped, sending a cascade of debris crashing down. Kozlov's partner disappeared under a section of collapsed scaffolding. Kozlov himself dove clear, rolling into the open with his pistol raised. Marcus was waiting for him. The abandoned warehouse on Pier 47 reeked of salt, rust, and something else Marcus couldn't quite identify, a metallic tang that made his stomach clench. Through the grimy windows, the harbor lights cast dancing shadows across stacks of shipping containers and forgotten machinery. He crouched behind a corroded support beam, counting the figures moving through the space below. 6 tangos visible, probably more in the shadows. Sarah Chen's voice crackled through his earpiece. "Thermal imaging shows at least 12 heat signatures. They've got someone tied up in the center. Civilian clothes, female." Marcus's jaw tightened. The mayor's daughter, 18 years old, grabbed from her college campus 3 days ago. The terrorists had been saving her for last, their final bargaining chip before whatever hell they planned to unleash on the city. "Where's my backup?" Marcus whispered into his throat mic. "Still 15 minutes out," Detective Morrison's voice replied, strained with frustration. "SWAT's dealing with a fake bomb threat at City Hall. These bastards planned this perfectly. 15 minutes. The girl might not have 15 seconds if they'd made her as bait for this trap." because that's what this was. Marcus could feel it in his bones. They wanted him here, alone, angry and reckless. A scream echoed through the warehouse. Plans changed. Marcus vaulted over the railing of the catwalk, dropping silently onto a stack of wooden pallets. His boots found purchase on the rough planks as he moved like smoke between the towering containers. The skills came flooding back, every lesson beaten into him during those brutal years of Royal Guard training, every technique honed in conflicts the public would never know about. The first sentry never saw him coming. Marcus's hand clamped over the man's mouth as his knife found the soft spot below the ear. The terrorist dropped without a sound, his AK-47 sliding into Marcus's waiting grip. 2 down, 10 to go. "Where are you, Sterling?" a voice called out in accented English. "We know you're here. Come out and perhaps the girl keeps all her fingers." Marcus peered around the edge of a shipping container. The terrorists had arranged themselves in a rough circle around their captive, a young woman zip-tied to a metal chair in the center of a pool of harsh LED light. Blood matted her blonde hair, but her eyes were alert, defiant. She reminded him of Emma at that age, all fire and stubborn courage. The leader stepped into the light, tall, lean, with the kind of scars that spoke of serious training. Marcus recognized him from the surveillance photos. Dmitry Kozlov, former Spetsnaz, current fanatic with a grudge against Western civilization and the skills to do something about it. "You killed my brothers in the subway," Kozlov continued, circling the girl like a predator. "Shot them down like dogs. Did it feel good playing hero again?" Marcus shifted position, using the container maze to get closer. 30 feet, 25. The range was closing, but not fast enough. "I researched you after that little display," Kozlov said. "Marcus Sterling decorated Royal Guard until you became a drunk, a failure, a man with nothing. Tell me, what's it like to lose everything? Your wife, your honor, your purpose?" The words hit harder than Marcus expected. For a moment, he was back in that courtroom, watching Catherine's lawyer systematically dismantle his life, watching his marriage, his reputation, his future crumble into legal fees and bitter recriminations. But then the girl lifted her head, and those defiant eyes found his position in the shadows. She didn't call out, didn't give him away. Instead, she shifted slightly, and Marcus saw what she was doing, working at the zip ties, using a piece of broken metal she'd somehow managed to grab. Smart kid. "The thing about having nothing left to lose," Marcus called out, his voice echoing through the warehouse, "is that it makes you very, very dangerous." Kozlov spun toward the sound, but Marcus was already moving. The first burst from his liberated AK-47 took out the generator powering their lights. Darkness swallowed the warehouse, broken only by muzzle flashes as the terrorists opened fire at shadows. Marcus rolled left as bullets sparked off concrete where he'd been standing. His night vision, trained through years of operations in places where electricity was a luxury, gave him the advantage. He could see them stumbling, shouting orders in Russian, firing at ghosts. The girl was free, rolling away from the chair as chaos erupted around her. Marcus put 3 rounds into the terrorist nearest to her position, then sprinted across the open ground as return fire chewed up the floor behind him. "This way!" he shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her toward the maze of containers. "Who?" she started. Questions later. Running now. Behind them, Kozlov's voice rose above the gunfire, cold and controlled despite the tactical disaster unfolding around him. "Light this place up. Burn it all down. No one leaves." The smell of gasoline began to fill the air. The abandoned warehouse district stretched before Marcus like a concrete graveyard, shadows dancing between rusted shipping containers and skeletal crane structures. He moved through the maze of industrial decay with practiced silence, every footstep calculated, every breath measured. The terrorist cell had chosen their final stronghold well, multiple escape routes, elevated positions, and enough cover to make any direct assault a bloodbath. Marcus pressed himself against the corrugated metal wall of a storage unit, listening. 3 guards patrolled the perimeter, their voices carrying on the night air as they spoke in hushed Arabic. His earpiece crackled softly as Detective Sarah Chen's voice filtered through. Thermal imaging shows at least 12 hostiles inside the main building. They've got Mayor Davidson and 3 city council members in the northeast corner, 2nd floor. Heavy fortification around the stairwells. Marcus closed his eyes, visualizing the building's layout from the blueprints Chen had transmitted earlier. The structure was a converted shipping facility. High ceilings, minimal interior walls, catwalks running along the upper levels. A fortress. But every fortress had weaknesses. "What about the old loading crane?" Marcus whispered into his mic. "Still functional, according to municipal records. But Marcus, it's a 40-foot span from there to the building. Even if you could, I'll make it work." He disconnected before Chen could protest further. The police had cordoned off a 6-block radius, but they couldn't move closer without risking the hostages' lives. The terrorists had already executed 1 city worker as a demonstration of their resolve. Marcus understood their psychology. Cornered animals fighting with desperate fury, willing to burn everything down rather than surrender. Moving like smoke through the industrial labyrinth, Marcus eliminated the perimeter guards one by one. The first never saw him coming, a silent takedown from behind, pressure applied to the carotid artery until consciousness faded. The second guard turned at the soft sound of his partner's body hitting the ground, but Marcus was already there, combat knife sliding between ribs with surgical precision. The third guard was more alert, weapon raised as he swept the area where his colleagues had vanished. Marcus waited in the shadows of an overturned shipping container, counting heartbeats. When the man passed his position, Marcus struck like a viper, hand clamping over the guard's mouth as the blade found its mark. 3 down, 9 to go, plus whoever was leading this operation. The loading crane loomed against the star-scattered sky, its arm extending toward the warehouse like an accusatory finger. Marcus scaled the maintenance ladder with fluid grace, muscle memory from his Royal Guard training, overriding the protests of his battered body. At the top, he could see into the warehouse through grimy skylights, armed figures moving between wooden crates, the hostages bound and kneeling in a circle of harsh spotlight. A man in tactical gear stood over them, assault rifle in his hands. Even from this distance, Marcus could see the dead coldness in his eyes. This was Khalil Hassan, the cell's leader, a former Syrian intelligence operative who'd orchestrated 3 bombing campaigns across Europe. Marcus had studied his file during the long hours of preparation. Hassan was methodical, ruthless, and utterly without mercy. The crane's control booth was locked, but Marcus made short work of the mechanism with his knife. The ancient machinery groaned to life, cables squealing as the massive hook began to swing toward the warehouse. Marcus timed his leap perfectly, catching the cable as it reached the apex of its arc. For a heartbeat, he hung suspended over the abyss, 40 feet of empty air between him and the concrete below. Then momentum carried him forward, and he crashed through the skylight in an explosion of glass and fury. Marcus hit the warehouse floor in a combat roll, fragments of window raining around him like deadly snow. Shouts erupted from the terrorists as they scrambled to respond to this impossible intrusion. Marcus was already moving, his stolen AK-47 chattering as he dove behind a stack of pallets. "Impossible." Hassan's accented voice cut through the chaos. "The building is surrounded. How did you—" "Some of us don't need an army," Marcus called back, reloading with practiced efficiency. He could see the hostages 20 meters away, terror etched on their faces. Mayor Davidson caught his eye and nodded slightly. The older man was keeping his people calm, showing the kind of leadership that had made him Marcus's choice for this impossible rescue. Marcus counted muzzle flashes in the darkness, 7 guns still firing. He'd taken down 2 in his initial assault. The odds were improving, but Hassan's men were well trained and disciplined. They moved in coordinated pairs, using suppressing fire to advance on his position. Time was running out. Soon Hassan would realize his tactical disadvantage and execute the hostages rather than risk their rescue. Marcus had seen this calculus before in a dozen foreign operations, desperate men choosing scorched earth over defeat. The warehouse light suddenly died, plunging everything into absolute darkness. In the confusion that followed, Marcus smiled grimly. Now they were fighting on his terms. The abandoned warehouse district stretched before them like a graveyard of industrial ambition. Marcus crouched behind a rusted shipping container, his breath forming small clouds in the pre-dawn cold. 3 blocks away, thermal imaging had confirmed what they'd suspected. The terrorist cell had established their final stronghold in the old Meridian steel plant. 17 heat signatures, whispered Detective Sarah Chen through his earpiece. Looks like they're concentrated, on the 2nd floor, northeast corner. Marcus adjusted his tactical vest, feeling the familiar weight of weapons and equipment he hadn't carried in years. The muscle memory was returning faster than he'd expected, or wanted. What about the device? Unknown. Could be anywhere in that facility. The dirty bomb. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, thinking of the thousands of innocent people sleeping in their beds just miles away. His ex-wife Elena lived in that radius. So did countless others who deserved better than what these fanatics had planned. "Sterling," Commander Hayes's voice crackled through the comm. "You still have time to walk away from this. Let my team handle the assault." Marcus almost smiled. "Almost. Your team doesn't know what I know about Kozlov's methods. They'll be walking into a maze of tripwires and kill zones." He checked his rifle one final time. "Besides, I'm already dead to the world that matters. Might as well make it count." Movement caught his eye. A figure appeared at one of the building's upper windows, a sentry scanning the perimeter with night vision goggles. Marcus tracked the pattern, counting the seconds between sweeps. 14 seconds. More than enough. "I'm going in," he whispered. "Negative. Wait for backup to get into position." But Marcus was already moving, his body flowing through the shadows like water. The years hadn't dulled his instincts. If anything, the pain and loss had sharpened them into something more dangerous. He wasn't the same man who'd served with honor and distinction. That man had been destroyed in a courtroom, buried under accusations and legal papers. What remained was something harder, more ruthless. The outer perimeter was exactly what he'd expected. Pressure plates hidden beneath loose gravel, motion sensors disguised as debris. Child's play for someone who'd spent years learning to think like Kozlov. Marcus bypassed each obstacle with practiced ease, closing the distance to the main building. 30 yards, 20, 10. The sentry appeared in the window again, and this time Marcus was ready. The suppressed shot took the man down silently, his body crumpling behind the glass. No alarm, no shouts, just the whisper of wind through broken windows. Marcus scaled the external fire escape with fluid precision, each movement calculated to minimize noise. The 2nd floor entrance was booby-trapped. He could see the thin wire stretched across the doorframe. He traced it to a cluster of grenades mounted on the interior wall. Crude but effective. Kozlov's signature was all over this place. Using his knife, Marcus carefully disconnected the trigger mechanism, then slipped inside. The interior was a maze of abandoned machinery and makeshift barriers, perfect for defense, terrible for escape routes. These men were here to fight to the death, not run. That told him everything he needed to know about their timeline. Voices echoed from the northeast corner, speaking in rapid Arabic. Marcus moved closer, using the massive industrial equipment as cover. Through a gap in a concrete wall, he could see them, 7 men clustered around a metal table. On that table sat a device that made his blood run cold. The dirty bomb was smaller than he'd expected, but no less terrifying. Conventional explosives packed around radioactive material, designed to spread contamination across miles of populated area. One of the men was connecting wires to a digital timer. The display showed 47, 33, 47 minutes. "Contact," he whispered into his comm. Device confirmed. Timer active. 47 minutes and counting. "Can you disarm it?" Marcus studied the bomb through his scope. Kozlov had taught these men well. The device was a nightmare of redundant triggers and false wires. Not remotely. Someone needs to get close, and they need to know what they're doing. Extracting you now. We'll send in the bomb squad. No time. They'll detonate it manually if they see anyone coming. Marcus felt that familiar calm settling over him, the same feeling he'd had in a dozen other impossible situations. I'm going to clear the room. That's suicide, Sterling. Maybe. But Marcus thought about Elena, about the life they'd built and lost, about all the people who would never wake up if he failed. He'd already lost everything that mattered. His reputation, his marriage, his future, all of it was ashes. But this he could still do. Tell my ex-wife. He paused, then shook his head. Never mind. She wouldn't want to hear it anyway. Marcus Sterling stepped out of the shadows, rifle raised, and prepared to do what he'd been trained for, one last time. The abandoned warehouse district stretched before Marcus like a concrete graveyard, shadows dancing between hulking structures under the pale moonlight. His earpiece crackled with static as he approached the coordinates Chen had given him, the cell's final stronghold where they held the mayor and 12 other hostages. Perimeter teams in position, came Detective Rodriguez's voice through the comm. We count at least 8 tangos, but there could be more inside. Marcus pressed himself against a rusted shipping container, feeling the familiar weight of his tactical vest and the Sig Sauer holstered at his hip. 3 days ago, he'd been drowning his sorrows in cheap whiskey. Now he was leading a joint task force operation against trained killers who'd turned his quiet town into a war zone. Remember, these aren't amateurs, Marcus whispered into his mic. They've had weeks to prepare this location. Expect booby traps, multiple exit strategies, and kill switches on any explosives. Through his scope, he studied the main warehouse, a 3-story brick building with industrial windows running along the upper levels. Heat signatures from Chen's thermal drone showed the hostages clustered in what appeared to be the central loading area, with guards positioned at strategic choke points throughout the structure. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, letting his Royal Guard training resurface. Room-clearing techniques he'd mastered in Belfast, hostage extraction protocols from assignments he'd tried to forget. The muscle memory was still there, buried beneath years of suburban complacency, but awakening like a sleeping predator. Alpha Team, you're with me through the east entrance, he commanded, his voice carrying an authority that surprised even him. Bravo Team takes the loading dock. Charlie covers R6 and watches for runners. As they moved through the maze of shipping containers toward their entry point, Marcus spotted the first sentry, a young man with nervous eyes scanning the approaches. Amateur. Marcus had neutralized him with a sleeper hold before the guard even registered movement, lowering the unconscious body behind a concrete barrier. The east entrance was exactly what he'd expected, a heavy steel door with a simple electronic lock. Too simple. Marcus ran his fingers along the frame and found the pressure plate wired to what looked like enough C4 to collapse half the building. Bomb on the door, he reported quietly. Give me 30 seconds. His hands moved with practiced precision, isolating the trigger mechanism and carefully disconnecting the detonator. Elena had always teased him about his obsessive attention to detail during his guard days. Now those same habits might be the difference between saving innocent lives and creating a massacre. Clear, moving in. The interior of the warehouse was a labyrinth of stacked crates and makeshift walls, lit by harsh industrial lights that created deep pockets of shadow. Marcus moved like a ghost through the maze, his team following in perfect formation. Each corner could hide death. Each footstep might trigger an alarm that would doom the hostages. They were halfway to the central area when the shooting started. Bravo Team had walked into an ambush at the loading dock. Automatic weapons fire echoed through the cavernous space as Marcus heard Rodriguez shouting orders through increasingly panicked radio chatter. The element of surprise was gone. Alpha Team, double time, Marcus barked, abandoning stealth for speed. They had minutes, maybe less, before the terrorists started executing hostages. A figure emerged from behind a crater head, assault rifle raised, finger tightening on the trigger. Marcus's SIG was already moving, muscle memory overriding conscious thought. 2 shots center mass. The terrorist dropped without firing a round. More movement to their left. Marcus rolled behind cover as bullets sparked off metal, fragments singing through the air. He popped up and acquired his target. Another clean kill. His team advanced like a well-oiled machine, covering each other's movements with the precision of elite operators. They reached the central loading area to find chaos. The hostages huddled together in the middle of the space, while 3 terrorists argued heatedly in what sounded like Arabic. One of them held a detonator, his thumb hovering over a red button. Marcus studied the scene through a gap in the stacked pallets. 12 innocent people, including Mayor Davidson, zip-tied and terrified. The bomber was positioned where a clean shot would be nearly impossible. The other 2 guards had clear firing lanes on the hostage group. Sniper teams. "Do you have angles on the tangos?" Marcus whispered. "Negative. Too much obstruction." Marcus felt the familiar cold calculations settling over him, the mindset that had made him one of the Royal Guard's most effective operators. Sometimes the only way to save lives was to risk everything. "Alpha team on my mark. Create a distraction from the south side. I'm going in alone." "Marcus, that's suicide," Rodriguez protested through the comm. Maybe it was. But looking at those terrified faces, thinking about Sarah Chen and everyone else who'd already paid the price for his past failures, Marcus knew he had no choice. Some battles could only be won by men who'd already lost everything. The warehouse district erupted in chaos as Marcus Sterling pressed his back against the corrugated metal wall, breathing hard. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer with each passing second. The terrorist cell had chosen their final battleground well, a maze of industrial buildings that could hide an army or trap one man forever. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage around his left shoulder, a souvenir from the firefight at the chemical plant 30 minutes ago. He'd prevented them from releasing the toxin into the water supply, but at a cost. 3 of Khalil's men lay dead in that facility, but the leader himself had escaped with his remaining operatives, including the bomb maker who'd been orchestrating this nightmare from the beginning. Marcus checked his stolen rifle, 4 rounds left, not nearly enough for what lay ahead. The distant rumble of helicopters filled the air, federal response teams probably, too little, too late, as usual. They'd secure a perimeter, establish command posts, and debate tactics while innocent people died. Marcus had seen it before in Bosnia, in Afghanistan, in half a dozen other places where politicians measured lives against political capital. His radio crackled, Detective Sarah Chen's voice cutting through the static. "Sterling, where are you? We've got eyes on movement in Warehouse Complex 7. Looks like they're setting up for something big." Marcus keyed the transmitter. "How many civilians in the area?" "Night shift workers, security guards, maybe 2 dozen spread across 6 buildings. SWAT's 20 minutes out." 20 minutes. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering his wife's voice during their last argument. "You can't save everyone, Marcus. You can't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders." She'd been wrong about one thing. He could try. "I'm going in," he said into the radio. "Negative. Wait for backup." Marcus switched off the radio and moved toward the complex. The skills buried beneath years of civilian life surfaced like muscle memory. Every shadow became cover, every sound a tactical advantage. The Royal Guard training that had made him legendary among his peers, before the scandal, before the disgrace, flowed through him like electricity. He spotted the first sentry through a grimy window, amateur positioning that screamed desperation. These weren't the disciplined soldiers from the initial attacks. Khalil was working with whoever remained, pushing towards some final objective that would justify the losses he'd sustained. Marcus slipped through a loading dock, moving silent as smoke. The guard never heard him coming. One swift motion, and the man crumpled, unconscious but breathing. Marcus had killed enough people this week. He wouldn't add to the count unless absolutely necessary. The interior of the warehouse stretched into darkness, broken only by shafts of light from industrial fixtures. Shipping containers stacked like building blocks created a three-dimensional maze, perfect for ambushes, terrible for escape routes. Voices echoed from the far end of the building, Khalil's distinctive accent cutting through the air like a blade. Marcus moved closer, using the containers as cover until he could make out the words. Symbolic target will demonstrate that nowhere is safe. The financial district bombing was merely the opening act. Financial district. Marcus's blood ran cold. His ex-wife worked downtown, probably pulling another late night at the law firm. Rachel might hate him, might have taken everything he owned, but he'd sworn an oath to protect her once. Some promises transcended divorce papers. He peered around a container and counted 6 men clustered around a table covered with building schematics and timing devices. Khalil stood at the center, his injured hand bandaged from their earlier encounter. The bomb maker, a thin man with nervous eyes, assembled components with practiced efficiency. 6 targets, 4 bullets. The math was brutally simple. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of every decision that had led to this point. The investigation that had cost him his career, the marriage that had crumbled under the pressure of his guilt, the years of exile from the only life he'd ever known. When he opened them again, he was no longer Marcus Sterling, disgraced ex-husband and failed protector. He was a weapon shaped by the Crown's finest trainers, honed by combat in the world's darkest corners, and tempered by loss that had stripped away everything except purpose. The first shot dropped Khalil before the sound registered in the warehouse. The second and third took down his lieutenants as they reached for weapons. The 4th bullet shattered the timing device in the bomb maker's hands. Then Marcus was moving, diving from cover as automatic weapons fire erupted from the surviving terrorists. Concrete chips and metal fragments filled the air like deadly snow. He rolled behind another container, already planning his next move. 2 men left, no ammunition, and somewhere across town, federal buildings and skyscrapers full of innocent people waited in the crosshairs of madmen. The sirens were getting closer, but not close enough. Everything would be decided in the next few minutes, one way or another. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps as Marcus adjusted his tie with hands that no longer trembled. 3 weeks had passed since the warehouse, since Volkov, since everything changed. The bandages were gone now, leaving only thin scars that would fade with time, unlike the memories that would remain razor-sharp forever. Detective Sarah Chen emerged from the building, her expression unreadable as she approached. Behind her, Agent Morrison followed, his federal bearing intact despite the casual clothes. They'd become unlikely allies in the aftermath, their initial suspicion replaced by grudging respect. The grand jury returned the indictments this morning, Chen said without preamble. 8 members of Volkov's network. The 3 survivors will spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. Marcus nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor emptiness. Justice was a cold thing, he'd learned, necessary but insufficient to fill the holes that violence carved in the world. There's something else, Morrison added, his voice careful. Washington's been asking questions about you. The words hung in the air like smoke from an old fire. Marcus had expected this moment, had been preparing for it since he'd first picked up that rifle in his apartment. Skills like his didn't go unnoticed, and in a world where experienced operators were valuable commodities, retirement was often a temporary condition. What kind of questions? The kind that come with offers, Morrison said. Good ones. The agency has long-term operations that could use someone with your particular background. Someone who understands that sometimes the only way to protect innocence is to become something darker than the threats they face. Marcus looked across the street, where ordinary people went about their ordinary lives, grabbing coffee, checking phones, complaining about traffic. They had no idea how close they'd come to losing everything, how thin the line was between civilization and chaos. Perhaps that was as it should be. I appreciate the offer, Marcus said finally, but I'm done being that man. Chen studied his face with the intensity she usually reserved for suspects. Are you? Because from where I stand, that man saved this city. That man stopped a massacre. That man also created a graveyard, Marcus replied. I've buried enough people, Sarah. I won't add more unless I have absolutely no choice. As if summoned by his words, a familiar figure approached from across the plaza. Elena Martinez had traded her nurse scrubs for civilian clothes, but she still moved with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to emergencies. Her arm was out of its sling now, the bullet wound healed to an angry red mark that would pale with time. "Gentlemen," she said, nodding to Chen and Morrison before turning her attention to Marcus. "Lady, I hoped I'd catch you here. Are you healing?" Marcus asked, genuinely concerned. "Clean through and through. I'll have full mobility back within a month." She paused, her dark eyes searching his face. "The question is, how are you healing?" It was a loaded question from someone who'd seen him at his most vulnerable, who did witnessed both his capacity for violence and his struggle with its necessity. Elena had been there in the warehouse's aftermath, had helped patch his wounds while he stared at the bodies he'd created. "I'm learning to live with what happened," he said honestly. "Some days are easier than others." "The hospitals offered me a position heading up their emergency trauma program," Elena said. "Better pay, more responsibility. But it would mean staying here, in this city." Marcus caught the subtext in her words, the unasked question that hung between them, like a bridge waiting to be crossed. "Congratulations," he said carefully. "You'll be brilliant at it." "I was hoping," she said, her voice softer now, "that I wouldn't be the only one staying." Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with a text message. The number was unknown, but the words made his blood freeze. "The man who killed Viktor Volkov. We know who you are. We know where you live. This isn't over." Chen noticed his expression immediately. "What is it?" Marcus handed her the phone, watching her face harden as she read. Morrison leaned over, his jaw tightening as he processed the implications. "Volkov's people?" Morrison asked. "Or someone who bought his debts," Marcus said grimly. "Revenge is a growth industry in that part of the world." Chen was already on her radio, calling for increased patrols, while Morrison worked his own phone, probably alerting federal task forces. But Marcus knew the truth. If they wanted him dead badly enough, eventually they'd find a way. That was the price of the choices he'd made. Elena stepped closer, her hand finding his arm. "So what do you do now?" Marcus looked at her, then at Chen and Morrison scrambling to coordinate protection, then back at the innocent people living their innocent lives across the street. The answer came with crystalline clarity. "I stay," he said simply, "and I wait for them to come."